have Dr. Frank Huang. Frank is a Steinway artist and currently serves as an associate professor of piano at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Frank is currently recording the complete solo piano works of the neglected Russian Romantic composer Nikolai Medtner. He released the second installment of the 9-disc project in February 2025. His previous Medtner albums were met with positive reviews, as Gramophone described that Huang and Medtner are made for one another, and that Huang can hold his own next to Marc-Andre Amelin. He is also committed to continuing education and has contributed guest articles to UK's popular magazines, Pianist, Gramophone, and International Piano. He has also produced tutorial videos for Henley's Urtext score reader app. Frank has a Bachelor of Music and Master of Music degrees from the Juilliard School, where he studied with Julian Martin. Following his training at Juilliard, he earned a Doctor of Musical Arts degree at the Cleveland Institute of Music under the direction of Antonio Pampabaldi. Thanks for being here, Frank. We're so excited to hear your Medtner. Take it away.
All right. So, great. Can we hear this? Good. So, well, thank you, Julia. Thank you, all of you, for being here, and also for the folks on Zoom. I do realize that the that the weather is a little less than fortunate than but I do appreciate all of you joining me to hear me talk about a topic that's really I'm really passionate about. It's been really occupying my my source of inspiration, if you will, for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. So today's presentation, as you can gather from the slide, centers around a composer who was held in the highest esteem by his contemporary, many listeners today. Nikolai Medtner was a Russian Romantic composer who was good friends with Sergei Rachmaninoff, and Rachmaninoff supported him a lot, artistically, financially, especially in the most difficult times. Rachmaninoff even declared that he was the greatest composer, Medtner was the greatest composer of his time. And despite all of this promise, and despite all of this extraordinary endorsement by Rachmaninoff, Medtner's music surprisingly occupies a very small place on today's concert stage. Rather than speak about Medtner's language in advance, I would like to let the music speak for itself. So here's a short performance of one of his fairy tales. So to kind of prime the pump, if you will, Medtner, to really understand his music, it helps to place him within the extraordinary musical world of 19th and 20th century Russia. So Medtner was born in Moscow in 1880, and he trained at the Moscow Conservatory, and his education emphasized form and counterpoint, which are values, as I will discuss in a moment, remain like really, really central to Medtner's music for the rest of his life. And even though he was a formidable pianist, he really resisted the idea of a performance career. From like the very beginning, composition was his primary artistic identity. At the conservatory and in Moscow's musical circles, Medtner was surrounded by composers who would shape the future of Russian music. So two particular figures stand out, Rachmaninoff and Alexander Scriabin. As I mentioned, Rachmaninoff was Medtner's closest ally, even though their compositions or their compositional styles were quite aligned, and I would say their philosophy, their languages differ a little bit, and I'll talk about that later. Scriabin, on the other hand, was the path that Medtner did not take. While Scriabin was more interested in innovation, such as really the dissolution of tonality and radical experimentation, Medtner was more rooted in the tonal tradition. And in this sense, Medtner was, I would say he was a traditionalist. He thought that progress could occur by deepening, not abandoning inherited forms. The upheavals of the early 20th century had profound consequences for Medtner's life and career. After the Russian Revolution, Medtner left Russia and would live in exile for the remaining of his life, before finally settling down in England. And exile brought Medtner isolation and financial issues, but unlike his contemporaries, Medtner did not adapt his compositional style to cultural trends, and eventually his music began to fall out of the performance stage. And despite all of this, Medtner did not alter his artistic convictions. In fact, he continued to write and compose with the seriousness and inward focus, and his music was really out of fashion for its prevailing times, the prevailing times. And in a way, I can kind of appreciate this because Medtner, he knew who he was. So to understand Medtner's compositional voice, we must first understand what he chose to inherit. And he really, as I mentioned, did not want to break with the past, and he wanted to continue with the Germanic tradition. And so that conversation begins with J.S. Bach. A lot of Medtner's music is incredibly polyphonic and contrapuntal. And in this excerpt here that I've included here, this is from one of his sonatas. I recorded this actually just a few years ago. And here you have a right hand that is, you have the melody, and then it appears in canonic texture in the left hand, the upper voice. And then you see a lot of stuff in the left hand, a lot of ornate material, and it's almost as if Medtner just wanted to include as much stuff as possible. And it's really problematic, I would say, for the performer to not only work on shaping both melodic lines and getting the right type of balance, voicing, nuancing, so that everything can all be heard. And so I'm going to just play this a little bit under tempo so we can just hear what we're supposed to hear. Let me load this up on my iPad so I can see it better. Okay, well, it's not loading, so we'll get here. Okay, all so incredibly thick and dense. So I can't tell you the number of hours it took me to just kind of work on the right kind of balance on this. Beethoven was a primary influence on Medtner, specifically his thematic and motivic treatment, where a piece essentially is just built off of a single motivic idea. And in this sonata, we have the opening 5-note theme, and then as you see up there, I won't play it, but it's sequenced. And this theme really just becomes the basis of the second theme, which is on the bottom excerpt. Okay. And so Medtner really adored Beethoven. And so I think we can see that here. He's taking a page out of his playbook, so to speak. And Brahms. When I think of Brahms, I think of really contrapuntal writing. I think of thick textures. I think of thick, large chords. I think of wide-ranging figurations. I think of the polyrhythms 3 against 2, and we have all of that here. Despite these Germanic influences, Medtner's music retains many Russian elements, specifically the use of Russian Orthodox chant. Now, Medtner did not quote this chant directly in his music, like some nationalist composers, but a lot of his music evokes the sense of this contemplative, really calm, serene atmosphere that is reminiscent of liturgical singing. And in a lot of his slow music, there's this element of timelessness. It just gives us that feeling of almost this kind of ritualistic, spiritualistic type of feeling. The influence of Rachmaninoff was also great. They both really they both believed in lyricism. They both loved rich chordal writing and just expansive melody and melodic arcs and phrasing. And then I'll talk about this later, but Medtner was also immersed from a young age of the idea of Russian literature and poetry, and he incorporates that in his music, specifically into his skaska, which is the Russian word for a tale. And again, I'll talk about that later, but the skaska was really central to Medtner's compositional life. So before I continue on, I would like to play a piece that exhibits a lot of these qualities that I just described. So this is a piece called Reminiscence Sonata, and it is a work that was written right after Medtner left Russia in exile. And so it's a one-movement piece, and it right from the very beginning, we get the most melancholic tune that you'll ever hear. It's, again, very serene and very contemplative. Again, gives that feeling of chant, and you'll hear this periodically throughout the movement. It's a lovely piece, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. gives you kind of a glance of Medtner's sound world and his compositional voice. So this portion, I think, really Medtner's artistic philosophy gives us an idea of really who Medtner was and how he viewed music. And to me, Medtner viewed composition, he took it extremely seriously. And I'll share some stories later of how serious, did he take this. But he viewed composition not just as a craft, he viewed it almost in a way as some type of higher calling, like in a sacrosanct type of way. In the 1930s, Medtner wrote this book called The Muse and the Fashion, which was a passionate defense of what he believed music should stand for. So I read this book, and it was, I will admit, it was hard to follow, okay? One, because it's written in Russian and is translated into English, so sometimes it can be lost in translation. But the other reason is because he writes in the most abstract way, and so it's not always clear, at least to me, what he really means. But my understanding was that the muse represented the old guard. So this is the inner necessity, truth, and music in its purest forms. And my guess is that this was representing tonality, classicism, formal structures, these type of things. And the muse was going up against the fashion, and that was music that was novel for novelty's sake, music that seeked effect rather than meaning. And so I believe he was referring to the avant-garde experimental music. Around this time, atonality and serial music was extremely popular, so I'm pretty sure that's what he was referring to. And after reading this book, it just struck me that Medtner was a hopeless romantic. And I think he was just living in the wrong century. He really the 19th century. And when I think of 19th century Romanticism, I think of composers like Beethoven and his obsession with this heroic idea, right? Or Schumann and Davidsbündler. Actually, my mind immediately went to Schumann because of, Davidsbündler, the League of David, this imaginary league of composers that were fighting the good fight against the Philistines, in reference to the David and Goliath story. And so, to me, I think Medtner viewed himself in a way as the hero, as the muse going against the fashion. So I found these parallels quite striking. And so, as I mentioned, he was reacting against breaking with tonality for the sake of progress, abandoning form and thematic development, valuing novelty over authenticity, and treating music as some type of experiment rather than expression. And I want to make sure, I want to point out that Medtner did not reject innovation. In fact, he embraced it, as long as he felt that it arose out of musical necessity, and that originality comes from truth. And I like this last one, that music is a moral art. This is one of my favorite quotes from the book, and to me it just sums up his feelings about what music is, and is that true creative work arises where intellect and feeling are deeply unified.
Can you read it for the folks?
Sure. Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I forgot. Inspiration comes where thought is saturated in emotion, and emotion is imbued with sense. I like it. It's succinct and it says everything. It represents his thoughts on music. So to me, the fairy tales, or in Russian, сказка, are really emblematic of Medtner's artistic philosophy. And I'm not entirely sure, but I know Skaska, just really, the actual translation is just tale. And I think because Medtner was living in England at the time, I think fairy tales were more marketable. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's why he adopted the fairy tales in this title. But the fairy tales, they are short character pieces of wide-ranging difficulties. Many of them have a Russian folklore or literary type of connection, but not all of them do. And to me, this is just musical storytelling and musical narratives. And sometimes when Medtner does not include any type of program or story behind the fairy tale, I think he kind of leaves it up to us, the performer, to do the work and to figure out how to, in terms of what we want to evoke. But I would compare the Skaska to Chopin's mazurkas in terms of the importance to the respective composers. Both of them composed these pieces throughout their compositional career. Medtner wrote about 40 of them, and Medtner's, like I said, the fairy tales are incredibly evocative. And Rachmaninoff really loved these pieces. He even said, and it's hard to read here, but it says, "No one tells such tales as Kolya." So I think Medtner played one of his fairy tales, and Rachmaninoff was just captivated by all of this, by all this creative work in here. And to me, that's this. I want to kind of circle back to what I was saying earlier, how Medtner thought that innovation could occur from deepening these past forms. And so I find that these works are incredibly creative and innovative in their own way. And I'm about to play you this piece, and it's one of my favorite fairy tales. This is the fairy tale Opus 34, number 4 in D minor. There is a quote in this fairy tale, and it says, "There lived in the world a poor knight." And this is in reference to a poem by Alexander Pushkin called The Poor Knight. And it tells the story of a knight in Palestine who worshipped the Virgin Mary, but he renounced all women, including the Holy Trinity. And so many years later on his deathbed, as he is being dragged to hell for his blasphemy, the Holy Trinity intervenes, I should say, and he ascends aloft. And the way Medtner conveys this in the music is absolutely magical, and I hope to do its justice in a moment. But so the piece is in D minor, and then it has all these anguishing chords, these somber chords. And at this moment, these D minor chords suddenly become D major of prayers and bells. And Medtner admitted that he was inspired by this moment of transfiguration. He was inspired by the Beethoven Sonata, Opus 10, number 3, the D major, the slow movement going into the D major minuet. So just for reference, this is the slow movement. It's just so magical. So anyways, and as we all know, D minor, historically, a lot of death tropes. So I just kind of want to get you into that kind of, that sound world. So this is Medtner's fairy tale, Opus 34, number 4, again, in reference to The Poor Knight. get this question asked a lot. What are some great Medtner pieces, entry-level, friendly Medtner pieces that I can introduce to my students? And I really think there are a lot of pedagogical values when studying, from Medtner. And the first thing I will say is how to play contrapuntally and just polyphonic writing while embracing the Romantic style. So I think that's kind of, I don't know, I feel like students don't like polyphonic music because it's hard. Like Bach is so hard to play, but it's like they're like vegetables. They're good for you, and you just you don't like them, but they're good for you. And so maybe this is a way to kind of sneak in some contrapuntal, like the carrots, the peas under the potatoes, that kind of trick that we all do. But I think this, I do really believe the contrapuntal lessons are really great in learning about Medtner. Voicing, balancing of textures. As you can see, it's so rich in polyphony, so the student really needs to learn how to voice, balance, and all of these nuancing so that everything can be heard. The balance is appropriate. Tone production, I think that's a key thing. And pedal control, just there's so much stuff happening. If with sensitive pedaling, it can have all these different layers and texturing. So I compiled a not so comprehensive list of some Medtner pieces, and I would say that if you have a student that has studied two-part, three-part inventions, maybe they've looked a little bit at, maybe they've studied Prelude and Fugue from Well-Tempered, maybe they've done some Mozart and Haydn sonatas, maybe a Beethoven sonata, if they tackled some Chopin nocturnes, then I would say they're ready for Medtner. And for those of you that work with RCM method, I've included the approximate levels that are comparable to these pieces. I would say that Medtner's music, in terms of introductory, entry-level pieces, are more on the early to mid advanced levels. So here are some examples. The title is so misleading because it's not an easy piece. Romantic sketches for the young. We think of Album of the Young, we think of these type of pieces that are very friendly towards kids. And I mean, I can see where Medtner was going with this. Clearly he wants, there is two-part, three-part writing here. You have a nice right-hand, figure with luscious chords in the left hand, and then they have a role reversal and measure later. So here's a little bit of that. It's nice harmonies. Here is like a Chopin nocturne, melody in the right, accompaniment in the left. Almost sounds a little bit like early screwed up in a way. And this is such a lovely tune and just exquisite harmonies. I believe this fairy tale this piece was the only Medtner work that Vladimir Horowitz recorded. And it goes like this. It's a lovely work. I adore it. Okay, so when we consider the legacy of Medtner, in my opinion, we encounter one of the most fascinating paradoxes where, Medtner was admired by many of his peers, his contemporaries, musicians of his time, but decades, years after his death, he was largely forgotten. And really, his artistic identity, as I mentioned, really placed him at odds with the dominant currents of his time. As I mentioned, also, Medtner was resistant to the modernist movement and continued to write music that did not follow the current trends. So like his close friend, Sergei Rachmaninoff, they both wrote music that really honored the tonal tradition, as we talked about in the past. But unlike Rachmaninoff, Medtner did not cultivate a performing career. And I think that really hurt him. And when he did perform, it was often all Medtner recitals. So he really refused to adapt his music to a broader appeal. And I think that's one of the biggest differences between Medtner and Rachmaninoff. Often people ask me, how does Medtner's music sound like? And the easiest way for me to say it is just a cross between Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and Rachmaninoff. That's the easiest way for me to just summarize it in a sentence. But with Rachmaninoff, his music generally has the kind of instant appeal, instant gratification. Like when we think of the Second Piano Concerto, the Cello Sonata, the greatest hits, we fall in love with those pieces like immediately. And to me, with Medtner, I think it just takes time. It takes repeated listenings. It places, in my opinion, great demands on the listener to fully appreciate his music. And Medtner also avoided self-promotion. He hated that idea. He thought that the composer was just to create music, the performer was just to perform music. He viewed it in those kind of silos. And so and that really costed him. Rachmaninoff helped him, he arranged a tour for him in the United States in 1924, and that was supposed to launch his career and everything, but all of these decisions that I just mentioned really stunted all of that, and nothing really came of it, unfortunately. And lastly, a lack of diplomacy. I think that's one that we all struggle with sometimes. Medtner really believed in the integrity of the music. That was like the most important. That was incredibly paramount to him. And he had no room to compromise for anything else other than that. And there's a story that I learned about Medtner where he was rehearsing, he was going to play the Beethoven Fourth Piano Concerto, and I forget with which orchestra, but he was rehearsing it with the legendary conductor Wilhelm Mengelberg. And so they had one rehearsal, and so at the rehearsal, Medtner thought that Mengelberg was taking the first movement too quickly. And he thought, well, it's my right as the soloist, I can say that to the conductor. And I think you see where this is going. Mengelberg looked at him with a very condescending smile and said, "Young man, just play. Everything will work out just fine." And Medtner was furious. He slammed the piano lid and just stormed out of the rehearsal, and they had to find another pianist to play. So we all know conductors may not be the easiest to work with sometimes, but I think exercising some diplomacy there really would have really benefited Medtner in that case. So, so there were a few important individuals that supported Medtner. I already mentioned Rachmaninoff. In 1949, Medtner met the Maharaja of Mysore, Jayatimajendra Wadior Bahadur. Very hard name to pronounce. And he actually, he got into contact with royalty. And I believe this individual got a degree in piano performance actually from Guildhall School of Music. and wanted performing careers. So this fortuitous meeting really gave Medtner a lot of opportunities. And he supported Medtner to record his complete works. And so he had collaborations with some really amazing musicians, like the pianist Moisevich. They did some two-piano stuff, and then the legendary soprano Elizabeth Schwarzkopf. And by the way, Medtner wrote a bunch of songs, and they are incredibly difficult for both piano and voice. Unfortunately, Medtner was unable to finish this project. He passed away in 1951. But I've listened to a few recordings on, they're available on YouTube, and they're just amazing. So in 2017, I was invited to perform at the Medtner Festival in London. And after the festival, I had a chance to visit Medtner's home and grave, which is about a 30-minute train ride outside of London. And as you can see here, a very modest home and a very modest grave. And we compare that to Rachmaninoff, Beverly Hills home, grave outside of New York. So it just kind of shows you the reception and legacy of both composers. And last but not least, before I wrap up, I just want to thank you all for indulging me in sharing this project, this passion and project of mine. I first encountered Medtner when I was a student at Juilliard. A classmate of mine played his Tragic Sonata, which is one of his more famous works, and I was immediately taken away. I just had I remember just having a visceral and powerful reaction to it, and it just kind of led me down the Medtner rabbit hole. And so about 2015, I started this recording project of, as Julia mentioned, of recording the complete solo piano works of Medtner. And there's a lot of music. There's 9 albums, a lot of notes, some not so easy. Not just pianistically, but just musically, to just understand what to make of it. But as you can see here, I've recorded I released the first 2 albums, and you can, if you're interested, you can listen to them on your streaming platform of choice. And if you're interested in learning more about my project, you can visit my website. So before I wrap up, again, thank you, and I want to end the presentation with another short performance called Festive Dance. Thank you.
Thank you.